January 20th, 1793. The frost clings to the cobblestones of Paris like a warning no one can read yet. At the Tuileries Palace, a single candle flickers in a second-floor window, where a man who was once called the most Christian king in Europe sits awake, writing letters he knows will never arrive. The air smells of wet stone and yesterday's bread. Somewhere in the Marais district, a baker opens his shutters. The hinges creak. That sound, metal on metal, will be the leitmotif of this day. Outside the Temple prison, where Louis XVI has been held for 4 months, the guards change shifts without ceremony. Their breath forms clouds in the January cold. They do not speak. There is nothing left to say. The trial concluded 3 days ago. The vote was counted. 361 deputies voted for death. 360 voted for alternatives. 1 vote. A civilization balanced on a razor's edge, and the edge just tilted. The city does not yet know what it has become, but the architecture knows. The statues in the Place de la Révolution, formerly the Place Louis XV, cast shadows that seem longer than they should be. The pedestal where the king's grandfather once stood in bronze glory now holds nothing but pigeons and frost. Nature abhors a vacuum. So does history. The countdown has begun. By 09 AM, the machinery of collapse is already humming. But to understand how a nation arrives at regicide, you must rewind the clock not by hours, but by decades. In 1774, when Louis XV ascended to the throne at age 19, France was the cultural and military superpower of Europe. Versailles glittered. The salons buzzed with Enlightenment philosophy. French was the language of diplomacy from Moscow to Madrid. But success is a slow poison. The very prosperity that funded the philosophes and the grand armies also created an accounting nightmare. France was hemorrhaging money on wars it couldn't afford, subsidizing an aristocratic class that paid no taxes and borrowing against a future that would never arrive. By 1789, the national debt equaled the GDP. The interest payments alone consumed half the annual budget. When the financial system collapsed, the political system followed within weeks. The Bastille fell on July 14, 1789. Not because it was a military target, but because it was a symbol, and symbols burn faster than stone. What followed was not a linear progression, but a series of cascading failures. Each crisis demanded a more radical solution. Each radical solution created a new crisis. The constitutional monarchy failed in 1791. The flight to Varennes, Louis's botched escape attempt, transformed him from a reformable monarch into a confirmed traitor in the public imagination. By September 1792, the monarchy itself was abolished. And now, 4 months later, the revolution faces its ultimate test. Can a nation born from the king's authority execute the king himself and still claim legitimacy? The men in the National Convention think the answer is yes. They are about to discover that some lines, once crossed, redraw the entire map. As 00 PM arrives, the calculus of inevitability takes hold. The atmosphere in Paris shifts as the afternoon light slants through the winter clouds. In the convention hall, the deputies who voted for death avoid each other's eyes. Some write justifications for newspapers that will print them tomorrow. Others sit in silence, staring at documents they are not reading. There is a particular weight to premeditated killing that spontaneous violence does not carry. This is not a mob storming a palace. This is bureaucracy weaponized. Forms have been filled out. A schedule has been set. The guillotine, that invention of humanitarian reform designed to make execution swift and egalitarian, has been tested on straw bales and measured for blade angle. At 2:00 p.m., a carpenter in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine receives an order: reinforce the platform. No explanation needed. Everyone knows. By 3:15 p.m., the streets around the Place de la Révolution begin to empty in a way that feels wrong. Not the emptiness of curfew or fear, but the emptiness of collective breath-holding. Shopkeepers close their shutters early. Mothers pull their children indoors without explanation. The city is performing a ritual it has never performed before, and the muscle memory doesn't exist yet. At the temple prison, Louis XVI requests a priest. He is granted one. He asks for time with his family. He is granted 2 hours. The revolution, having decided to kill its king, now performs small acts of mercy that underscore the enormity of what it cannot undo. It is the same psychological mechanism that allows a surgeon to offer anesthesia before an amputation. Kindness becomes the frame that makes cruelty possible. By 5 p.m., the drums begin. Not the drums of celebration, but the slow, measured cadence of a funeral march that has not yet found its corpse. The city's heartbeat synchronizes to that rhythm. There is no turning back now. The hinge finally breaks. This is the hour when language fails and symbols take over. The carriage arrives at the Place de la Révolution under a sky the color of old iron. Torches burn in geometric patterns around the scaffold, not for illumination, but for ceremony. The crowd is vast and silent. Silence is the sound of a society watching itself commit an irreversible act. No cheering, no jeers, just the creak of the scaffold boards and the horse's breath steaming in the cold. Louis XVI steps down. He is 40 years old. He has rehearsed this moment in his mind for days, perhaps weeks. He attempts a final speech. His voice carries 3 words: "I die innocent," before the drums drown him out. The revolution does not want last words. It wants closure. The executioner's assistants move with practiced efficiency. Their movements are choreographed, almost mechanical. Theatre disguised as procedure. In the crowd, a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte watches from the periphery, his face unreadable. He will remember this moment. 26 years later, he will crown himself emperor in Notre Dame, reclaiming the divine authority being destroyed here tonight. The cycle is already beginning. At 10:22 a.m. the following morning, the official records will note the time with bureaucratic precision. The blade falls. But this script will not describe it. Instead, watch the light. The winter sun breaks through the clouds at that exact moment, illuminating the frost on the surrounding rooftops. The shadows of the scaffold stretch across the cobblestones like the hands of a clock frozen at the moment of impact. A witness later writes that the silence broke into something worse than screaming, a collective exhale, as if 30,000 people had been holding their breath and released it all at once. Some hats are waved, some citizens faint. Most simply stand, processing what they have just witnessed. The fire has consumed the law itself. The revolution has become something new. It has crossed the Rubicon not into empire, but into uncharted psychological territory. You cannot execute the divine right of kings and remain the society you were before. The social contract has not been amended. It has been burned and rewritten in real time. The frost returns, indifferent to what happened beneath it yesterday. The Place de la Révolution is empty except for a crew of workers scrubbing the platform. They work in silence. The scaffold will remain standing for months, a monument or a threat depending on who looks at it. The surrounding buildings seem to lean in closer than they did 2 days ago, as if the geometry of the city itself has been altered by what it witnessed. In the convention, the deputies are already arguing about what comes next. The execution solved nothing. It revealed everything. The coalition wars will intensify. The terror will begin within months. Robespierre, who voted for death with visible reluctance, will himself face the guillotine in 18 months. The machine they built to deliver justice will become the machine that devours its creators. That is the pattern. Revolutions do not stop at their stated objectives. They accelerate until they consume themselves. But here, in the cold morning of January 22nd, the immediate question is simpler and more devastating. What does a nation become when it kills the symbol of its own continuity? France in 1793 believed it was executing a tyrant. What it actually executed was the idea that authority flows from heaven to earth. The modern world, with its elected officials, its constitutions written by committees, its leaders who are employees of the state rather than embodiments of it, begins in this 24-hour window. Democracy did not start with a declaration. It started with a beheading. And if you look closely at our own era, at impeachments broadcast live, at leaders dragged from palaces by their own security forces, at the algorithmic dismantling of authority itself, you can still see the shadow of that scaffold stretching forward across the centuries. The question the revolution asked in those 24 hours was not, can we do this? It was, what are we after we do this? They discovered the answer the hard way. So have we. I remain committed to reconstructing the moments when history's compass spun wildly, pointing to futures no one anticipated. Together, we trace the lines that connect yesterday's revolutions to today's reckonings.